More reports have come out implying that Todd Bowles may not be fired if the Bucs win on Saturday. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Would like to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. I am James Yarcho, your host, writer with Bucs Report, here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. A couple of the ways you can support the show is you can become an all-access member. Go to lockedonbucs.supercast.com or become an insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/lockedonbucs, or you can click the link for both of those things in the show notes. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Some injury updates ahead of the game with the Panthers as some key Bucs starters return to practice, and a Buccaneers legend is set to walk away. That is all coming up in a little bit. Going to start off today with a report from ESPN's Jeremy Fowler, who weighs in on the Todd Bowles situation in a recent article saying, quote, on the Bucs, Todd Bowles' buyout would be hefty after the team extended his contract through 2028, and the team doesn't seem overly eager to pay that. Bailing on Bowles would be the Bucs' way of embracing a rebuild, but someone will have to pay if they lose to Carolina. Staff changes are not off the table either way. Fowler would go on later in the article to say, quote, there is talk in some league circles about the future of Bucs offensive coordinator Josh Grizzard. The offense has tanked of late, and Baker Mayfield has regressed in the second half of the season. Some level of change is needed after this year's late season collapse, which is at least somewhat injury driven. The Bucs are playing with third string offensive guards, and the running game hasn't been quite the same. Grizzard is well respected and helped former coordinator Liam Cohen with game planning last season, but the Bucs offense can't stop the slide, end quote. So let's start with the first one here, and Todd Bowles. This, to me, is similar to the Ian Rappaport report that we talked about on Monday. There's no sources tell me or I am hearing. It's sheer speculation based on a buyout, which we've already talked about that as well. This wouldn't be the first time the Bucs fired a coach who was still under contract or just received an extension. This is a matter of whether or not the Glazers want to spend the money to pay out a contract for a coach that isn't succeeding, or if they want to keep this status quo for another year. Say what you will about the Glazer family, but they want to win. They want another Lombardi trophy. So I find it hard to believe they can honestly evaluate and assess this team's performance this season and say, yeah, let's run it back next year. You have a guy in charge of your team that is a defensive specialist, and the defense has been atrocious down the stretch. It wasn't always that way, and they really aren't dealing with many more injuries than they were before bye week. You lost Kancey in week 2, but since then, the only starter that you've lost for any extended period of time is Zion McCollum, who wasn't playing all that well to begin with. So what changed? Well, what changed is that offenses, and more specifically offensive coordinators, have found and exposed the weaknesses of the players and the scheme, and Bowles has done nothing to counter that. He hasn't changed a single thing, and it has been costing the Bucs games. The other thing that I want to address here is the idea of a rebuild. And it's funny that this came up in the article from Jeremy Fowler and Dan Graziano, but we talked about it on the Squad Show. This is not a full rebuild situation. You only really need to revamp one side of the ball. When healthy, the offense is absolutely stacked, and we know what they're capable of. The offensive line injuries have been absolutely brutal. Baker is playing hurt. The play calling is flat out bad. But when you look at the roster, this roster doesn't need a rebuild. You don't have to blow the whole thing up and start from scratch. The defense needs another guy on the line to go along with Vita Vea and Calijah Kancey. You need 2 edge rushers, a starter and a rotational guy. You need 2 starting linebackers. Levante appears to be on his way out and headed for retirement, and Sebastian Dennis just is not starting caliber despite what the hopes were heading into the season, much like last year with KJ Britt. Your secondary is fine. You do need a depth piece at corner, but you're in pretty good shape in the secondary. So this isn't a rebuild by any stretch of the imagination. Take a look at some of the turnarounds that teams have had this year. Jacksonville, New England, Chicago. There weren't complete overhauls to those rosters. Look at the Washington Commanders last year. They got to the NFC Championship with a rookie quarterback and the right combination of young guys and veterans. The right coach can get this team where we all believed that they could go and can get them where they're capable of going. That is contending for a Super Bowl. The other part of Fowler's quote regarding Josh Grizzard seems relatively obvious, but it has me slightly concerned. This is the path to Todd Bowles retaining his job. Injuries were too much to overcome. Offensive coordinator wasn't the right fit. So let's go find another one along with a special teams coordinator, maybe replacing some position coaches, and give Bowles another crack at this. I understand the resume. 3 division crowns. You got a playoff win. You may have a 4th division title if the ball bounces their way on Saturday and on Sunday. But at some point, you have to ask the hard questions. You have to ask them, if you're the Glazer family, is Todd the guy that can get them to the Super Bowl, or is he just a decent head coach that can get to the postseason and then that's it? That's the ceiling. This team hit on back-to-back offensive coordinators, home run picks, and both of those guys were head coaches the very next year. Now it looks like both of them are going to be headed to the postseason with their new teams that were dumpster fires when they took over. That's something else that goes on Bowles' resume on the positive side. He missed on 1 offensive coordinator hire. So maybe he gets the chance to find someone new and gets one more run with this team. The concern there is it will be more of the same. You start off hot, you hit a midseason lull, you battle back to be in playoff contention at the end of the season, and then you're one and done in the playoffs. That seems to be the MO of Todd Bowles as a head coach, and I'm sure you don't want to risk another season of that. There's a lot of young talent in Tampa, but the core of this team, they're starting to get a little long in the tooth, guys. Mike, Baker, Chris, Vita, Antoine, Tristan, these guys aren't spring chickens anymore. Mike and Chris each only have probably a couple of years left at the most. Baker is now going to enter a contract year, and it's going to be interesting to see how Jason Light approaches that. Are you going to extend him, maybe even free up some money under the cap for 2026, and continue on with Baker, or are you going to play the wait and see game? Are you going to wait and see if he's more of the 2023, 2024 guy that set career bests in back-to-back years, or are you going to see if he's more of the player that we saw in 2025? This window won't stay open for much longer. Can you really risk spending another year on Bowles trying to figure out if he's the guy that can get you where you want to go? Losing 7 of 8, potentially 8 of 9, is a big reason why you cannot take that risk. Making the playoffs with a losing record for the second time in 4 years is a testament to the failures of those around you that your own failures could take advantage of. I can't see the Glazers saying that this was okay and that Todd should stick around, buyout or not. But that's going to be the big question. Are they willing to spend that money to move on and potentially get a head coach in the building that can maximize the talent of this team? Or are you going to allow the domino effect of bad things that happened this year to give Todd a second pass and see what he can do in 2026? I like Todd. He's a nice dude. He's a brilliant coach. but some guys are offensive coordinators or defensive coordinators, and some guys are head coaches. I think Todd Bowles firmly planted himself in the former of those two categories. The Bucs had a lot of players missing practice Tuesday, but saw most of them return on Wednesday ahead of their final game of the season, and that is some good news. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. NFL season is in full swing, and there's nothing like being at the game. The crowd noise, the energy, and cheering alongside other fans. Watching at home is great, but being in the stadium hits different. The frustrating part has always been getting tickets, waiting in queues, dealing with logins, watching prices change right at checkout. That's why the Game Time app gives the advantage back to fans. It's the hack for unlocking amazing NFL tickets and experiences in just a few taps. You're in the midst of the playoff push, and being there in the stadium, if your team clinches, is one of the best sports experiences. In fact, you can get tickets for the Week 18 game between the Buccaneers and the Panthers starting at just $80. And it's not just sports. Game Time price alerts are how I landed tickets to a concert just last month. All fees are included, so there's no surprises when you get to check out. What you see is what you pay. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today and get back to being there live. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you're a true diehard Buccaneers fan, the Everydayer All Access tier is built for you. You'll get one-on-one text access with me, all access episodes, an exclusive newsletter, and a 15% discount to the Locked On merch store. Head to lockedonbucs.supercast.com to join the Everydayer Club and unlock all access. You can also find the link in the show notes. On Tuesday, you had some key Buccaneers missing practice. Jamel Dean, Benjamin Morrison, Anthony Nelson, Tristan Wirfs, they were all DNPs. Now, the good news is that during the portion open to the media on Wednesday, Wirfs and Benjamin Morrison were back in action. Still no Jamel Dean, who's dealing with a shoulder injury, and no Anthony Nelson, who is dealing with a knee injury. Now, Tristan Wirfs is apparently dealing with turf toe, which is a serious injury. In fact, Tristan mentioned to the media that they need a better name for that, because turf toe, it just sounds like a hangnail. Whereas the truth of the matter is it has ended careers. You saw Joe Burrow this season missed most of the year with turf toe. You saw Deion Sanders get his toe amputated because of complications of turf toe that he suffered during his playing career. But Wirfs is expected to play through that injury on Saturday. The injury occurred towards the end of the first matchup with the Panthers, which is why he missed last week against the Dolphins. And you can look no further than Bradley Chubb's strip sack while going up against Ben Chukwuma as to why Tristan is so vital in this game. As for Benjamin Morrison, it's the hamstring again. And I don't know what's going on here. Someone needs to figure out how this keeps happening. And I understand a hamstring is a soft tissue injury and it's easily re-aggravated. Living close to Cincinnati, I witnessed a lingering hamstring injury derail Ken Griffey Jr.'s career. Like, he was amazing his first year with the Cincinnati Reds. Then he gets a hamstring injury, kept trying to come back too fast, kept re-aggravating it, and it really just absolutely caused his career to fall off of a cliff. Now, Morrison did play in 100% of snaps against the Dolphins, and his return to practice Wednesday is encouraging. This could have been simply a risk mitigation situation where they wanted to rest him, but you have to give him a designation on the injury report, but they wanted to rest him to make sure that he's ready for this game and to go up against Teteroa McMillan again, which honestly, he did a pretty decent job of the first time around. The problem will be whether or not Jamel Dean can play. If he can't, now you're talking about either Jacob Parrish moving to the outside or starting Kindle Vildor again, which has been disastrous at best during times this season. Dean has been dealing with the shoulder injury all season long, but it really flared up on him against Miami last week. That's why he was sidelined for most of that game. So having him on the field in this game would be crucial. If he's not, now you're talking about your second round pick, your rookie, being your number one corner this week. I do think Benjamin Morrison becomes a number one corner. I don't think he's ready for that responsibility in a must-win playoff atmosphere style of game, given how much time he missed throughout the offseason, throughout training camp, and throughout this season, dealing with that hamstring injury. The other good news is that Calijah Kancey is practicing. It looks like the Bucs could get him back for this game, which could absolutely change the entire landscape of this defense. His ability to get to the quarterback is outstanding. And, it's just that he can't stay healthy. Now, if you're talking about a secondary that has Benjamin Morrison and Kindle Vildor starting as your outside corners, having Kancey back and vamping up that pass rush, that's going to help your young corners. Kindle Vildor has been okay in spurts. He's more of a special teamer, but the best friend of a secondary is going to be getting to the quarterback faster, not leaving these guys on islands, especially against a player who has had a phenomenal second half of the season like Teteroa McMillan has. Having Kancey back in this game to go along with Vita Vea, Hassan Reddick, Yaya Diaby, even JPP, who had a couple of solid plays last week, that could prove to be the difference between winning and putting yourself in a position to go to the playoffs, or losing and sitting at home next week until OTAs. So, Elijah Roberts, another rookie, he has been good in spurts in a rotation. You're seeing the growth there, but a lot of these rookies, when you really sit down and think about it, Benjamin Morrison, Emeka Egbuka, Elijah Roberts, Jacob Parrish was a starter from the jump, but the Bucs have had to pile a lot of responsibility on these guys sooner than they probably would have liked to. You're talking about guys like Emeka Egbuka, who went from being, the number 3, maybe even number 4 receiver to start the season, had to be jumped up to number 2 because Godwin wasn't ready to return. And then you had the Jalen McMillan injury in the preseason. And then Mike goes down, and now all of a sudden, Egbuka is your number 1. And I do believe Egbuka is your number 1 of the future, but that wasn't the progression that they wanted. It's the same thing with Benjamin Morrison. He was supposed to be a guy that could come in. You saw the rotation early in the season. Still don't understand why you were rotating him with Jamel Dean for as well as Dean was playing early on instead of Zion McCollum. But you saw they wanted to get him some experience. They wanted to get his feet wet. But then all of a sudden, Jamel Dean goes down. Then then Zion McCollum goes down. But Benjamin Morrison is also battling injury, and you're having to pile more and more on him. Elijah Roberts, you have Calijah Kancey go down. And now all of a sudden, you have a depth rotational guy having to take significantly more snaps than what the original plan was. You can even say the same thing about Tez Johnson. Tez Johnson was going to be a situational guy. He's thrust into a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 role well before the Bucs wanted him to have to take on that responsibility. So again, these are more and more of the examples of how things really went sideways for this team this year. But you have to kind of tip your cap to some of these rookies and the way that they've been able to handle the adversity, the way that they've had to take on these roles. And sometimes it's worked. Early in the season, it worked beautifully. Not so much lately, but it will be great experience for them moving into their second year and moving forward to be able to rely on the mistakes that they made as rookies, even, whether it was in a win or a loss, learning from that and becoming better. So now maybe they're more impactful players a little bit earlier than what the timeline would have suggested based on what they were supposed to be doing coming into this year. We're going to have the final report, on the Friday live episode. That final injury report will come out on Thursday because the game is Saturday, but we're going to break it all down, We're going to talk about the ramifications of who is in, who is out on that live show on Friday. But the Bucs are saying goodbye to a legend that has been the voice of this franchise for nearly 4 decades. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Wrapping things up here on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. And whether you've been a fan for 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, you know the first person that comes to mind when you think of the voice of the Buccaneers. It's Gene Deckerhoff, and there's nobody like him. Gene is officially retiring after this season after 37 years of being the team's voice on the radio. His calls are iconic, and they live in the memories of Bucs fans, from Rondé's pick six at the Vet in the NFC Championship to Matt Bryant's 63-yard field goal to win the game, to run Michael for the team's first kick return touchdown by Michael Spurlock back in 2006. Every Bucs memory can be tied directly to what Gene was saying on the radio in that moment. Over 1,100 times, Gene has yelled, "Touchdown Tampa Bay," in his more than 800 games over the last 37 years. He's as beloved a member of the organization as Derek Brooks, Leroy Selman, John Lynch, Warren Sapp, or Mike Evans. Co-owner Brian Glazers said, quote, "For 37 seasons, Gene Deckerhoff's voice has set the scene for the most iconic moments in our franchise's history, and his signature calls will forever resonate with Buccaneers fans. His passion, authenticity, and unmistakable voice created memories that have been cherished and enjoyed by countless generations of Buccaneers fans." As he closes out his extraordinary journey, we congratulate Gene on a remarkable broadcasting career and wish him a well-deserved and fulfilling retirement, end quote. In a statement released by the Buccaneers, Gene Deckerhoff himself said, quote, "Calling Buccaneers games has been one of the greatest honors of my professional career. I've had the fortune to form meaningful relationships with players, coaches, and staff members, as well as interact with thousands of Buccaneers fans everywhere in the world. My wife, Ann, and I are grateful to the Glazer family for allowing us to be part of the Buccaneers organization for so many wonderful years. I am equally thankful to all the members of the radio crew and the partners I have had with me through the years, particularly Dave Moore, who has been by my side for the past 19 years. I will miss doing what I love, but now is the right time to step away," end quote. I have to laugh when I hear that Dave Moore has been by his side for 19 years because I remember when Dave Moore was playing for the Buccaneers. So it's just crazy that he's been part of that radio partnership for almost 2 decades, because it does not feel like it's been that long since Dave Moore suited up and was catching touchdown passes. On a personal note, I remember seeing Gene about a year and a half ago. It was before the preseason game with the Bengals last year. We were standing in line to get food, and I just, he happened to be in line right next to me, and I said hi to him, asked how he was doing. And he looked up and he said, "James, I'm great. How have you been?" I was stunned. For a guy like myself, who is not in the building all the time, I do not cover the team in person the way Rick Stroud, Greg Allman, Scott Reynolds, I'm not in the building every day like those guys are. Only on occasion do I get to cover games in person. Gene remembered me. And I remember my dad getting the biggest kick out of it because of how much he likes Gene. And for years, Gene was the way that my dad was able to follow Bucs games. So I remember texting him and be like, "You won't believe this," but I was talking to Gene and he immediately knew who I was. And my dad just thought that was the funniest thing. Gene was one of a kind. He may have gotten overly excited at times and botched a name or two, but that was part of his charm. He was getting as excited as you were on any given play, and you got to share in that excitement with him in that moment. as if he was your best friend on the couch beside you. Beyond that, Gene's just a great dude. He really is. He is the nicest, kindest person you would ever want to have a conversation with. So, on behalf of Bucs fans all over the world, Gene, thank you. Thank you for your passion, your love, your dedication to this team and its fans. Thank you for being part of our childhood all the way to our adulthood, for being the soundtrack to some of the greatest moments we will ever witness as sports fans. And thank you for being one of the best voices and best people that the NFL has ever seen. I don't know about you guys, but I think it's pretty obvious who the next name in the Ring of Honor should be, and that's Gene. Gene, happy retirement. I hope it's amazing. That is going to do it for this episode of Locked On Bucs. I want to thank you for tuning in. And, of course, we will have the crossover episode with Julian coming up tomorrow. In the meantime, please make sure that you are subscribed on YouTube with the notifications turned on, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. Follow on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @Yarcho_Bucs, Instagram and TikTok at Locked On Bucs in both of those places. Become an all-access member, guys. It's a lot of fun. You can do so by going to lockedonbucs.supercast.com or click the link in the show notes. If you want to support the show, but you don't want to be an all-access member, you don't want to be an insider, it's real simple. Like this episode on YouTube, leave a 5-star review wherever you get podcasts. It does help other Buccaneers fans find the show. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.